My son never knew I was bringing home $38,000 a month. Not once in the 3 years he lived under my roof did he think to ask how I managed. And I never told him. I suppose I should have. But when you've spent 40 years building something quietly, you get used to the quiet. My name is Donna. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Oakville, Ontario since 1989. The house isn't flashy. It's a red brick 2-story with a cracked front step. I keep meaning to fix and a maple tree in the backyard that turns the most extraordinary color every October. I bought it myself, back when I was 30 and fresh out of a marriage that had taken more from me than I care to say. I bought it, I renovated it slowly over the years, and I paid it off in full by the time I was 52. My son Kevin is 34. He works in logistics, manages a small team, good at his job, I think, though he doesn't talk about work much around me. He married Stacy 6 years ago. The wedding was lovely. I paid for a third of it without being asked and didn't mention it afterward. That's the kind of mother I am. Or was. I'm still figuring out which tense applies. When Kevin and Stacy were struggling to find a place, this was 2.5 years ago, the market in the GTA had gone completely sideways, and even a decent townhouse in Mississauga was listing at over $1 million. I offered them the lower level of my house. I'd had it finished years earlier, proper insulation, its own entrance off the side yard, a full kitchen, 2 bedrooms. I'd rented it out for a while, but it had been sitting empty since my last tenant left for Vancouver. I told Kevin, no rent, just cover your own groceries, treat it like your place. He tore up. Stacy smiled and said it was so generous of me I believed her. The first few months were fine. Better than fine, honestly. Kevin would come upstairs on Sunday mornings and we'd drink coffee and watch the birds at the feeder I keep by the kitchen window. Stacy joined us sometimes. She had opinions about everything: the neighborhood, the transit, the quality of the Tim Hortons on the corner versus the one on Lakeshore, and I found it charming. She was lively. She made Kevin laugh. I noticed things slowly. The way Stacy would look around my living room sometimes, like she was taking an inventory. The comments that started small and grew. The house was dated, the carpets in the hallway were tired, the galley kitchen upstairs was impractical. I agreed with her on the kitchen. I'd been thinking about renovating it for years. What I didn't expect was the shift in how she spoke to me. It started with tone. The kind of thing you can't quite prove. A flatness when she answered me. A pause before she said thank you, like she was reminding herself to say it. Kevin didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he noticed and didn't know what to do. He'd always been a little conflict averse. I never pushed it. I worked, I should say, though I still consult as a senior actuary for a large insurance company based in Toronto. I won't name them. I spent 38 years there, the last 12 as a principal, and when I retired 2 years ago, I negotiated a consulting arrangement that pays me well for about 15 hours of work a week. I also have a defined benefit pension, investments I've been managing myself since my late 30s, and the rental income I was no longer collecting from my own basement. My financial planner once told me I was in the top 2% of my age cohort in terms of net worth. I mention this not to boast. I mention it because it's relevant to what happened next. Nobody knew. Not Kevin, not Stacy, not the neighbors. I dressed practically. I drove a 2018 Honda CR-V. I clipped coupons from the Sobeys flyer and used them. I'd grown up without much, and the habit stuck. And also, I realize this now, I had reasons for keeping it quiet that I hadn't fully examined. It was a Thursday evening in February. I remember because I'd just come in from clearing the front walk, salt and ice. The temperature had dropped to -18 and my shoulders ached. I was making tea when I heard Stacy's voice through the vent in my kitchen floor. The vents in this house connect in ways that were never ideal, and I'd meant to have them looked at. Her voice carried perfectly. She was on the phone. I don't know who she was talking to. A friend, maybe. Her mother. She said, Kevin feels guilty bringing it up, but honestly, she's just sitting up there doing nothing. She doesn't work. She potters around. She's got this house she doesn't need, and we're practically funding her lifestyle by being here. I set down my mug. She doesn't have any real income. She's living off whatever Kevin's father left her, and she acts like she's doing us this enormous favor. We could be renting somewhere proper, with our own space. Instead, we're what? Charity cases in her basement. I stood very still. She asked me last week if we'd consider taking care of the lawn in the summer. The lawn. Like we're her groundskeepers. Kevin keeps saying be patient, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. She's just this burden we're dragging around because Kevin feels too guilty to say so. A burden. I picked up my tea and went and sat in my reading chair by the window. The street was dark and quiet. A snowplow went by, orange light sweeping across my ceiling. I sat there for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think it matters. I wasn't just hurt, I was something colder than hurt. I was very, very clear-headed. I thought, she doesn't know a single true thing about me. And then I thought, does Kevin? I called my financial planner, Anita, the next morning. She's known me for 20 years, and she doesn't waste words. I told her what I'd heard. I didn't cry. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I needed to think. She said, "Take your time. But Donna, you own that house outright. You own everything in it. I want to make sure you remember that." I did remember. I just needed someone else to say it. I spent 2 weeks being very ordinary. I made my tea. I shoveled the walk. I waved to Kevin on his way to work in the mornings. I brought a lasagna downstairs one evening and left it at their door the way I sometimes did. I watched Stacy accept it with that flat smile, and I watched Kevin and thought, when did you stop seeing me? He'd stopped asking about my life gradually, the way these things happen. He knew I'd worked in insurance. He knew I'd retired. I don't think he knew what an actuary was, not really, and I'd never pressed the point. I was Mom. Mom had her pension. Mom was fine. I contacted a lawyer, a woman named, I'll call her my solicitor, who handled an estate matter for me several years ago and knows my affairs. I told her the situation. She wasn't surprised. She's seen versions of this before. She told me what I already knew. I could do what I wanted with my own property, my own assets, my own life. She helped me think through a few things I hadn't considered, mostly about documentation, and we spent a couple of sessions getting everything properly organized. Meanwhile, I started paying closer attention. I noticed Stacy coming home from shopping more often, not grocery shopping. Bags from stores on Yorkville, a new coat, what looked like a new set of luggage. Kevin had mentioned money was tight. I'd nodded and not said anything. I noticed she'd begun referring to the house, my house, the one I'd owned for 35 years, as the property. As in, when Kevin and I eventually have more space, we'll need something bigger than this property allows, said to her friend, I think, in the backyard one afternoon when she didn't realize I was in the garden behind the fence. I thought about my mother, who had come to Canada from County Clare with $40 and a phone number of a cousin in Hamilton. I thought about what she would have made of all this. I made my decision on a Sunday, which felt right. Kevin was upstairs. He came up for coffee more often when Stacy was out, and we sat at my kitchen table with our mugs and the radio on low. He looked tired. He always looked a little tired these days. I said, "Kevin, I want to talk to you about something." He looked up. I told him everything, not dramatically. I wasn't angry, or I was past it by then. I told him what I do, what my pension is, what my consulting brings in, what my investment portfolio is currently valued at. I told him calmly, the way you'd explain a balance sheet. I watched his face move through about 6 different expressions. He said, "Mom, why didn't I know any of this?" "I don't know," I said. "Honestly, I don't." I said, "Honestly, I don't. I think I wanted you to see me as your mother and not as a number. And I think somewhere along the way, I stopped trusting that you'd still show up if the number was very large." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I always show up." "I know," I said. "But Kevin, does Stacy?" I told him what I'd heard through the vent. I told him all of it. I didn't soften it. He deserved to hear the actual words. He sat very still. His coffee went cold. He didn't defend her, which I noticed, and I filed that away. Finally, he said, "I'm so sorry, Mom. I know you are. What do you want to happen?" This was the question I'd been sitting with for 2 weeks. This was why I'd called Anita and the solicitor and gone on a few long walks along the lakefront in the cold to think. I said, I want you and Stacy to find your own place. Not because I'm angry, I am, but that's not the reason. Because you need to be a family in your own space, and so do I. And because I think as long as you're here, neither of you will see me clearly. He didn't argue. I think some part of him had known it was coming, or had known something needed to change, and had been too tired or too stuffed to name it. What happened next took about 6 weeks. Kevin told Stacy they were moving. She took it. I heard none of it, Kevin told me afterward, with a performance of graciousness that apparently fooled neither of them for long. She had some things to say, I gather. About me. About the arrangement. About feeling pushed out. Kevin told her what I'd told him about her phone call. That conversation, he said, was very hard, but necessary. They found a rental unit in Burlington, 2 bedrooms, nice building, close to the Joe station for Kevin's commute. I didn't offer to help with first and last. I want to be clear about that, not as punishment, as a boundary. They were capable. They needed to know they were capable. Moving day was a Saturday in April. The maple wasn't quite leafing yet. I made coffee and stayed out of the way. Kevin came upstairs before they left. He hugged me for a long time. He said, I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I stopped paying attention. I held on to him. He smelled like he did when he was small, that same particular smell that mothers remember and never quite describe. I said, pay attention from here on. That's all I want. Stacy stood at the bottom of my front steps while Kevin loaded the last boxes. She looked at me and I looked at her. She said, thank you for everything, Donna. Her voice was careful, the way people's voices are when they're not sure what they owe you. I said, take care of him. She nodded. I think she meant it. They drove away. I stood on the porch until I couldn't see the car anymore. Then I went inside and made a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the window where the birds come. And I thought, I am 67 years old and I own my life and my house and my time, and this morning is mine. A month later, I had the lower level repainted, soft white, the way I'd always wanted it. I've been renting it out again since September to a woman in her late 20s who works in healthcare and is never home, practically speaking, and who always transfers rent on the first of the month without being reminded. Kevin calls me every Sunday now, without fail. We talk for an hour, sometimes more. He and Stacy are in couples counseling, he told me a few weeks ago, which took courage to admit and courage to start. And I told him I was proud of him. I meant it. Last month he called on a Wednesday, which was unusual. He said he needed to tell me something. I felt the old reflex, that clench of waiting, and then I made myself let it go. He said, we're having a baby, Mom, due in September. I pressed my hand over my mouth, sat down on the stairs. He said, you're the first person we've told. I thought of my mother getting on a plane with $40 and a cousin's phone number. I thought of that maple tree turning red every October. I thought of how long some things take to come right, and how, sometimes, they do. Tell me everything, I said, and he did.